from the Salvation Army National Headquarters, this is the Fight for Good podcast.
Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Fight for Good podcast. I'm your host, Lieutenant Colonel Tim Foley, broadcasting from my office here at National Headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia. Yeah, we're still under the COVID restrictions, and most of our crew for the Program and Publications Department is working remotely. However, yours truly is safely nestled in my lovely office here. And I am so excited that we have the opportunity to talk about the August issue, August 2020, the issue of the War Cry, with my good friend, our editorial director, Mr. Jeff McDonald.
Greetings, Colonel Foley. So good to be with you. You know, we appreciate your leadership through these days and your commitment to our work.
Well, it's an interesting time to navigate through lots of uncertainty and things that seem to be changing on a dime. But you guys, I can't be more proud of a group of people that I've ever worked with than what's happening with our War Cry team. Issue after issue, just kind of steady as she goes with all of it. So it's easy to lead a group of people that give me inspiration and great to work with. It's also great to work with our producer of the Fight for Good podcast, Elizabeth. Good morning.
Good morning.
And you are super duper today, I hope.
I am so super swell. It's fantastic.
And the exciting thing, as the Fight for Good podcast is growing, we're able to identify different authors, even actors, special people in the Salvation Army world that we're bringing on. So down the road, there's a lot of good fodder, as they would say, in the storehouse, and you got a lot to work with.
Oh, there's such great stuff coming up. Oh my gosh. Listeners, stay tuned for the most epic interviews you have ever heard on the Fight for Good podcast.
And it's this one, right? Right?
It's totally this one right now. We can only go down from here.
Who are some of the people that you're excited about that we've already interviewed that will be kind of coming up? We could already do a little sneak peek here.
Okay. I am most excited for the one and only Carlos and Alexa Penavega.
Which Jeff is just all over that. He's all over that couple.
Yeah. No, I know you guys are. Yeah.
Oh, yes. I mean, the memories it brings back is just remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
But
the memories.
Yeah.
I have great memories.
Now you can tell our listeners who are they? Who are they?
So Carlos is a member of the award-winning group Big Time Rush, also had the TV show on Nickelodeon, Big Time Rush, also in Big Time Movie. So that's Carlos. And we know Alexa from Spy Kids and the hit tween movie Sleepover, really setting the standard for what every girl wanted a slumber party to be like.
So if you're somebody the age of Jeff and myself, we will recall that those were shows that our kids enjoyed.
Yes,
exactly.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, our kids kind of grew up watching Nickelodeon, and one of my kids was actually on a Disney Channel show for 4 years. So I'm kind of aware of that time frame. So I'm really excited about that. But we have other people, and we're making more inroads, and we're trying to be intentional about broadening our articles that are and our influencers and our actors and authors and other people as we go down the road. So we're very excited. But we thank you, Elizabeth, for pulling that all together. Today's episode, we like to do an episode, if you're a new listener, we like to do an episode that features this month's issue of the War Cry. And you can imagine, obviously, the War Cry does not come to us in some sort of vacuum prepackaged sort of thing. Each issue starts about 60 to 90 days in advance. We have themes that we work off of, and we're always looking for material to kind of populate. And that's one of Jeff McDonald's jobs, is to just kind of work with his crew on laying things out. So it's always interesting when we come to the time when we're kind of reviewing the current month's issue of the War Cry. At this particular time right now, we are about ready to I call it put to bed, the September issue and the Christmas War Cry of 2020. So for us to kind of go back and go, oh yeah, we did an issue of August. We have to have to renew our mindset a little bit. And Jeff, there were some great things in this issue that just kind of popped out. And I'm just going to toss the ball to you here, so you could tell our listeners a little about some things to kind of look for that are special.
Definitely. And, we're just trying to be, there's so much that the Army speaks into in this culture. We just, lay it at the Lord's feet and hope that the words that we convey, the images, etc., the podcasts, they hit home with people, and God can use that material to inspire them. This August issue is a case in point in that, one of our themes we focused on was, the question of what is God's will. Now, that might not be pertinent to everyone, but it is a question, certainly at this time in our lives when there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a quote from the Bible study in the August issue that says, God has not spun creation into motion and then walked away. I think the material in this issue reinforces that. We do feature the women's ministries in the Army on the cover, which is a topic of women's ministries reimagined. But, Colonel, it's a distinction of the Army, of the involvement of women in the ministry, and also how the Army works with women around the world, whether it be through, local organizations in corps in the USA, or through microcredit programs in places like India, where they're helping women and groups of women become self-sufficient using crafts. So it's just a facet of the Salvation Army that I think is important, of course.
Well, I think the thing that's been interesting for me with, I'm in my 39th year of being, ordained as a Salvation Army officer. One of the things I'm most proud about is the fact that we settled the issue of ordaining women in our inception. The booths were truly visionaries, and stepping forward in a time that was not necessarily very opportunist for women. Women have had a challenge in the Salvation Army. It hasn't always been easy. There's a lot of discussion these days about giving women opportunities for serving in positions that traditionally have been reviewed, that have been kind of reserved for man. Myself, I'm extremely proud of my own wife, who she never wants to blow her own horn, but as a married woman officer, to kind of sit in the number 3 chair here at National Headquarters as our CFO, National Treasurer, and Secretary of Business Administration. I've watched her over the years just work very hard and very steady in those kind of roles. At the same time, when we were corps officers, we poured our heart into women's ministries. And I know, as a young single lieutenant for a couple of years, the Home League was the highlight of my week in the first corps that I was in charge of. Jeff, I really like this feature. I love this cover. People need to know that this cover picture is something that we wanted to run. I think it was back in, if my memory serves me right, we wanted to run it in May. Was that right?
Yeah, right.
We
Yep.
wanted to do it.
That's correct. Yeah.
And so all the COVID thing kind of bumped this cover down, but it's just a delightful, joyful picture, and I hope people could do it. And there's something in the article itself which comes from Commissioner Rosalie Petal, the wife of General Petal, but also the world president of Women's Ministries. She said the breadth and reach of women's ministries is limited only by our vision and our willingness to step out in faith to make a difference in the lives of women and girls today. And so I think all of us can be proud of what the Salvation Army is doing. I hope all of us, men as well, step up to the plate, give our wives opportunities, those of us that are married women, married officers, to, sometimes Jeff, it means I have to step out of the way and allow her, my wife, to kind of soar in some of the strengths in her gift set. But we all can be proud of the fact that the Salvation Army really has a prominent place for women in our early beginnings and today to do ministry.
There's several topics in this issue that we have to mention. It's great to be able to focus on the work of the adult rehabilitation centers the Army runs throughout the country in helping people recover from addiction. The article, we do have a profile of an individual who was helped through the program, but that article states every day in America, more than 6,500 people are hospitalized from drug or alcohol overdoses. We also have an article discussing the problem of addiction and why it is so baffling and what would you say, difficult to overcome. And, my hat's off to those people in the ARC ministry who deal with that gritty reality, helping people come out of addiction and coming alongside them through that fight, because it is a fight. And it's easy to fall back. And it's just a special ministry the Army runs. So we're glad to have that in this issue.
Well, the ministry of the Salvation Army with getting people right again, not only with their relationship with God, but getting their bodies right, their minds right, establishing their right relationships with their families again, all the brokenness that we see in the world. It's not drug and alcohol addiction is not glamorous. It's not like the commercials kind of would lay it out, how easy it is to just kind of have a beer or a glass of whiskey and things just kind of go on. We have seen firsthand the devastation of what alcohol and what all the variety of drugs do to people and the ripple effect that has. Jeff, one of the things I've been very proud about with the ARC ministry in recent days is during the COVID era, I think you're aware of this, but our listeners may not be. We did not close our ARC programs across the country. There was a great sacrifice there with that financially. Because the ARCs are funded solely through the donations of in-kind gifts that are sold through thrift stores, and across the country for several months, our ARCs were hampered by the fact that they could not open their thrift stores and generate the revenue. But the ARC administrators and their staffs came up with creative ways to keep men and women engaged, keep them focused on their road to recovery. And we, that's kind of a sidebar. I think, again, something that we all should be extremely proud about.
Yeah. And, you talk about the impact of technology. People can go to satruck.org and find donation options there wherever they live in the States and other options.
We're excited to see a couple weeks ago here in the local DC news, the media was covering the fact that the Salvation Army, the donations to the local Salvation Army in Arlington was causing traffic jams. I think it was like the traffic people were wanting to, bring their stuff in, and it was backed up onto the freeway, and it's kind of interesting. So great. And you've got a couple of big article on addiction, talking whisper or scream louder.
Correct. Yeah. By one who's a recovering alcoholic who now counsels people in that, in recovery. And he, outlines, that the problem is a disease and people are not to be blamed, but they need to get over the hurdle of admitting the problem and facing it. So it's a powerful article also. Also, we do have a practical issue article in this one by Bob Hosteller, a frequent contributor to the War Cry, who we will be featuring on a future podcast. And he writes about how to hear from God, thinking about God's will. And so often people wonder what directions they should take in their life and if God really does care about them. And, how do you go about even knowing that there is that possibility? And he's offers very practical steps.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that Bob Hostetler is contributing a few articles in the past and in the future. I love this article that he's written on how to hear from God. I mean, a lot of people want to, they want to hear from God and direct. And I've always been afraid of hearing an audible voice from God, because I think if I ever do, I will just turn into a instant puddle of goo. But what I like about Bob's article here is he's basically got 7 great stepping points, and I think this is really good Bible study material right here. So
Yeah.
I would encourage our readers to maybe pull this one out and save it for the future.
Yeah, Colonel, also, I appreciate, your emphasis on getting new voices into the magazine, into our work. And, there's so many passionate voices out there doing good work in the Army and externally, with people who respect what the Army stands for. So, and one of the example of that is the millennial content that you've had included in the issues. And this August issue, we feature Paige Taylor, and she deals with avoiding peer pressure. And she talks about how she, went through the party scene and had to decipher, what her path was and not listen to all the voices around her, possibly getting her off track.
Well, we've been intentional, and I think our regular readers of the Work Cry will have seen that there's a little bit of a different flair and flow to things, and part of that is just the fact that a magazine has to recreate itself, and we have to develop new writers and authors. Also, I mean, we do have a millennial, a young lieutenant, Stephanie Stephanie
Pavlakis, yeah.
Pavlakis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I always stumble on her name. She was one of my students when I was teaching at the training college. I kind of encouraged her to submit some stuff, and I love this poem.
It's great.
On everyday communion that she wrote, is explaining koinonia. So we want to make sure it's kind of like spoken word, isn't it? It's not necessarily like poetry in traditional format.
That's true, and we included it because we're focusing on what is God's will. Of course, God's will in the end is to point to Jesus as Savior. But she talks about, her poem communicates how the Army interprets God's will in its acts, in its work, and the fact that the Army considers everyday life to be sacred. So she refers to, having coffee with the people at the Corps or with family, and using those moments as signs of God's presence. So yeah, it's an interesting take for us, and that's another new voice that we've been able to include. But again, there's so many voices, so many stories out there in the Army. We just love to cover them, and we look forward to hearing from more. Another example of that is the influencer, and this one is with Terry. Is he a captain?
Yeah,
Or
Captain
major?
Terry. I know he's still a captain, I think. Captain Terry Masango. Yeah.
Terry Matango, he's featured. He has some great answers about what the Army is about and what he's about, and why he's so passionate about his work. But he has an interesting quote. He says, "The biggest threat, and maybe he means possibility, that the Army faces is proclaiming the message of God without sounding exclusive and bigoted." And on that subject, of course, in these racially tense times, we've included the Army's position statement on racism in this issue, and we've also included on the back cover a poem by former General John Gowans, who records, who writes, um, the black, the white, the dark, the fair, your color will not matter there. They'll come from the east, they'll come from the west, and sit down in the kingdom of God. And that's one of the beauties of the Army, Colonel. It crosses boundaries, ethnic, cultural, social, economic, not just in the U.S., but around the world.
We are a very diverse organization. You know, we have our 11 cardinal doctrines that are uniform across. We're one of the few denominations that has this kind of real solid international core set of beliefs that stay together, and then how the ministry of the Salvation Army uh, operates and functions within the span of 132 countries, I think it is right now, is just phenomenal. And it's just amazing. I think, Jeff, also the thing I think we need to keep our readers and our listeners of the podcast in mind is that we're here telling the story of the Salvation Army. Our purpose, really, of our magazine, as we put it pretty plainly on the front cover, we're the official magazine of the Salvation Army in the United States, fighting for good. So we want to cover a variety of topics. At times I know people may say, "Well, you're not being progressive enough," or whatever. But like I like to say, Jeff, we're not sojourners. We're not going to run down a lot of different rabbit holes on different issues. We're kind of a centrist, but we will speak truth into some of the things the issues of the day that kind of come up. And sometimes it may rub our readers the wrong way, that we may not go far enough or that we go too far. So I know that you've been at this for a while. So there's an interesting balancing act when it comes to how we kind of lay out content and our approach.
Mm. Yeah, that's one thing. The Army, really, I think, identifies with the common ground in our culture, and we don't want to take sides or be divisive or argumentative in our approach, but really to focus on those things that we have in common.
I think on the back cover, just a little bit of kind of a side note on this was General Gowans wrote these lyrics as part of a play, a musical. General Gowans and General Larson wrote several musicals in the Salvation Army during their tenure. And this comes from the play Blood of the Lamb, which was debuted in 1980 at a national Congress, and it was exciting. I was a candidate at the time, and as you know, my love for theater, I got to be in the debut production of this. So, Elizabeth, you asked earlier that off mic, maybe you could sing for us. Well, here's my opportunity. No,
Let's do
no,
it.
but I and having had General Gowans as my divisional commander when I was a young lieutenant, knowing what his heart was and how passionate he was for making sure that the Salvation Army, really understands what the kingdom of God is, and how the kingdom of God really needs to be inclusive, and where we need to sit down as brothers and sisters and hash out these things. So I'm glad that we're committed to these things and these issues, the race issue. And there's other issues down the road for us to continue to wrestle with, and so we thank God for our listeners and our readers, and we also thank God for our contributors. And we want to give voice to new authors. We want to give people opportunity, and we are doing that. It may not be in the printed magazine, but certainly I know, Elizabeth, you're hard at work at always looking for content for our webpage, www.thewarcry.org. Yeah. So we want to, if you're listening there and you're thinking, you know what, I think I want to write something, we'll just send it our way. And we have a mechanism for you to do it. Doesn't mean that we're going to always print everything that we get, right, Jeff? I mean, sometimes we get some interesting things that
Well, yeah.
are just kind of not fit to print. Also, we don't want people offended if we don't put their stuff in right away, or if we have to send it back and say, rework it, because the listeners and readers need to know, Jeff, you do that to me constantly. Rework this, Colonel. This is pure garbage. What are you submitting here?
One day it's going to be so clean, we won't have to do a thing. And then what do we do?
Then what do we do? Is there anything else in this particular issue that our listeners and readers should consider?
There's just so much. But another example of a contributor that, a new voice in the publication is Mr. Philip Supek, Hospitality Ministry Director for the Ray and Joan Kroc Core Community Center in Philadelphia. He writes about, going out during this COVID epidemic and distributing food in North Philadelphia. And he went into this neighborhood, and someone come up to him and said, a resident came in and said, "No one ever comes here. Thank you for coming." I just thought that was really a great story. Indicative of what the Army does.
There's so many different stories like that, and we can't cover them all, but that was a great example of some very, very practical, ministry that the Army did and continues to do, because as we're recording, the COVID epidemic is still with us. I guess one last feature I think we should give note to, that we start with June, July, August. I think we'll run another one in the September issue, are the testimonies of the new lieutenants that have been commissioned from the Salvation Army training colleges throughout the country. I really like this one with Lieutenant Samantha Haskell, and she shares her testimony, a very, very interesting way that she met the Lord and how she met the Salvation Army and how God has graced her with a divine call and the opportunity to be trained as an officer and go to work. So Jeff, thanks for continuing to support the work of our training colleges, our 4 training colleges across the nation, and how important it is that we have people that are coming up after you and I to be able to carry on this work.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, there's some great stories. Their testimonies are really good. And she talks about becoming an officer and how, she couldn't think at the beginning that she could do the work. And there she is, acting in that capacity as an officer, and all the officers do.
Well, we hope you enjoy the August issue of the War Cry, and know that our staff has poured a lot of hard work into it, a lot of prayer, and we hope that you'll find it an enjoyable read and something that you'll pass on to other folks. Well, that's going to end this episode of the Fight for Good podcast. Be sure to subscribe to Fight for Good for wherever you listen to your podcasts out there. We're all over the place: YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, Cricket, something else, Elizabeth? I don't know. There's all kinds of new platforms that pop up every day, and you're always putting us out there. So thank you for downloading, and spread the word. We've got some great podcasts and some great interviews scheduled coming up. And so we hope you'll pay attention and just keep supporting our podcasts. Don't forget to follow The War Cry and Peer Magazine on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. Until next time, this has been the Fight for Good podcast. Bye for now.
Subscribe to Fight for Good wherever you listen to podcasts.